It's very rare that I get to travel, but when I do, it's usually for work. Not all the time, but every so often I'm required to travel to another part of my area and stay in a decent hotel. All paid for, of course. Not that bad of a deal, except sometimes there's a factor you don't account for. My most recent one being an event happening at a hotel I was staying at. At first, I was confused when I saw the first person walk by looking like a sports mascot. That's what I first thought it was, just someone who promoted a local business in the flashiest way he could. But then I saw another, then another, and then another. Soon there were hordes of them roaming the hotel and interacting with one another. I was a bit embarrassed to ask one of them what was going on. However, the receptionist filled me in. It was apparently a grassroots convention for a community called Furries to meet. To those like me that don't know, furries are a community of people whom identify as various animals and act out their fantasies dressed up as their fursonas. I try not to judge, but it was hard not to gawk at. It wasn't until I got back to my room and decided to research things online that I saw the more depraved part of this group. Needless to say, I tried to avoid them the whole weekend. This was a task much easier said than done. That night, I tried my very best to get a long sleep so I could be ready for an early start the next day. My downtime was often limited when traveling for work, so I had to make the most of it when I could. However, the bumping beats from the rooms adjacent practically shook my walls, and that was just the music. The music was so loud that they practically had to shout to talk, so their voices carried over too. Along with the sounds of the opposite rooms separately going off, all of this added up to a constant stream of incoherent noise. What's worse is when the music and partying finally stopped, and I was accepting the idea that sleep may come that night, a new noise started. At first, it was a lot of rocking and bouncing. This soon developed to what I can only describe as the most animalistic sound I'd ever heard a human make, as they recreated what I used to watch on Animal Planet when my parents weren't around. After a restless few minutes of sleep, the next day wasn't any better. The day before, I had seen a few of these fiends wearing what looked like oversized underwear. What I didn't piece together was the fact that they were diapers. This conclusion came to me when I saw tied up stained white bundles laid around the car park, one neatly sitting on the front of my car. My frustration was very rapidly turning to a dark shade of anger. When I got back to the hotel from a long day fueled by fumes of little sleep and pots of coffee, the day was made worse. The bustling of the convention was in full swing. Littered on the floor around the hotel were little gas canisters. I could see people perplexed at what they were, as was I, until I overheard a conversation about them. They were canisters filled with nitrous oxide, laughing gas. And this was the evidence we could see. God knows what other narcotics they were taking behind the scenes, fueling this insane bender I was stuck in the middle of. The introduction of drugs only escalated the insanity around me. Despite my better judgment, I decided to see if I could cool down at the bar. It was a small tradition of mine to go to the hotel bar after a long conference, a bonus that everything was paid for. The smell in there was horrendous. The musky aroma wafting from all directions of various flavors, all built up in the seemingly unventilated cocoons that were the suits. In the bar is where they all seemed to be taking a breather, taking off their masks and chatting away. However, without the suits muffling their voices, I could hear the vile things they were saying. A lot of plans to get wasted on all kinds of narcotics, followed by detailed plans of sins I'm sure would make the devil cringe. In my mind, enough was enough. But I was not in a position to take any kind of action. So I did the pettiest thing I could think of in my slightly inebriated state of mind. I sabotaged one of their suits. I ordered 2 drinks that would make the nastiest cocktail when mixed. A vodka orange juice and a white Russian. Orange juice to make things nice and sticky, and milk to really make a stink worthy of what I felt I'd been put through. When one attendee wasn't paying attention to his mask, I snuck over and poured in my mixture and quickly left, adrenaline coursing through me as I quickly hobbled back to my room. That night, I bore with the sleepless night a little better, a small sense of victory soothing my anger. Before long, I was home, and from then on, life returned to a sense of normalcy. A few weeks later is when I started noticing things that were off. Every few days, I'd notice that my doors were splashed with something. They'd have wet streaks all along it, including the handle. One would simply think it was rain. However, the weather was holding pretty well, and the week had been bone dry. The more immediate sign that something was going on were the scratches. I came out one morning to make my drive to work when I noticed paint missing on my driver's side door. At first, it looked like I'd bumped into something without realizing, but the closer I got, the more it looked deliberate. There were 4 uniform lines that ran horizontally, that sloped at the end. I stared in a mix of emotions, cycling through anger to confusion to sadness, finally landing on acceptance before heading off to work, the cost of repairs sitting in my mind. This was an easier thought to sit with. The other thought I was suppressing was a niggling feeling that the 4 lines kind of looked like claw marks. That night, I didn't get much sleep. Despite what happened during the day, it wasn't because of that. It was because of something much worse. While lying in bed, I was up all night due to something which never let me rest. A noise. It started as a small, quiet whine. It sounded like a strong wind catching on some trees, a low whistle that sounded every so often. The sound gradually got louder, a mystery that made sense when I realized that whatever was making the sound was progressively getting closer to my house. Eventually, it sounded to be just outside the walls of my room, and at this distance, I heard everything with a clearer lucidity. It sounded animalistic at first, the howls of a beast that wandered too close to civilization, a hint of confusion, but full of a sense of dominance, a message I took to heart to never get close to whatever was making the sound. But as it persisted, I noticed something about the howling which set my hair on end. It didn't sound wholly from an animal. There were hints of human. After this, I started paying more attention to my surroundings, keeping an eye out, especially in my neighborhood. A deep sense of paranoia crawling up my spine and making its home on my shoulder. You know how they say ignorance is bliss? Well, in some ways, I wish I kept my head down and just lived with the thought that whatever was happening was just random, isolated incidents. On the corner to my street, I'd occasionally see some young-looking people conveniently always concealed, something which wouldn't normally stand out, but now set my mind ablaze with questions of who they were, if they were there because they lived in that neighborhood, or if they had ill intentions. I pushed my luck by trying to subtly get their attention. I looked over and stared at them for an abnormal amount of time. When they glimpsed back and saw I was looking, they slinked away. A few times of doing this, I noticed something peculiar as one turned away. Something long and fuzzy hanging on the back of their jeans, reminiscent to a tail. As much as I tried to deny any correlation to the business trip, I couldn't quell these theories spinning in my mind. I was rampantly thinking how to end this. I couldn't call the police. What would I say? Some spooky kids are looking at me when I drive home, and some easily deniable things occasionally happen to my property? There's so much deniability in that. No, I needed to catch them in the act. So, that's what I set out to do. I travelled to an out-of-town department store and bought a set of security cameras. It didn't take long to install, and I was soon feeling pretty confident in my idea. That night, I slept peacefully with no interruption at all. The next day, I had a full day of work and felt confident that I probably wouldn't need to check the tapes, thinking that things might have calmed down now. Nevertheless, for assurance, I pulled up the previous night's footage and scrubbed through it when I got home. The greenery in the background twitched at an unnatural speed as I scrubbed through the empty footage. Squeaks of sped up noise occasionally coming out as a car passed by. Once night hit, the infrared sensor kicked in and dropped everything to a negative-looking black and white. As soon as I saw movement, I immediately paused the screen. In the middle of the frame was a figure. My heart sank, but held a little hope that it was just a lost passerby. When I scrubbed a bit further, I saw what it was, and suddenly, I didn't feel safe anymore. Standing still was a figure adorned in a full fursuit. I switched between normal speed and fast forward. Both presented this still standing figure. I saw the light of the moon rise and dim. I had ran through a few hours of footage, and a glimmer of hope shone. It was possible they knew there was a camera installed and convincingly placed a mannequin to give this eerie appearance. But as soon as the slivers of sunlight glimmered down, I saw the figure turn and walk away. My heart sank. What hurt most is that I could not seem to catch them in the act of doing something criminal, and when I did have evidence, it was of something innocuous. No one would be able to help a situation like this within my means. As a last-ditch effort, I looked online for answers. As like before, searching vague statements turned up to a lot of unsavory images and videos. The deeper I looked, the more depraved media I found. However, when I started searching for more specific terms including clips of my name and address, it turned up something which took me aback. A long forum post dedicated to me. It started as a shame post. Someone was filming their friend in a bar at the hotel, and when the cameraman caught a glimpse of me acting suspicious, they focused on me. As he did so was when I openly sabotaged the headpiece. The replies were a lot of disgust, and yes, looking at it out of context to my feelings, it did look bad. However, a bit further down, more active members started what turned into a witch hunt. They called the hotel under various aliases until they got my room number, then my name, then my address. My private information was posted for everyone to see, and this exposure was celebrated. It was a game to them, which they had been playing at my expense. With these leads, they rallied to a single cause: revenge. All of this was open to find. Various surface-level details of me, ideas ranging from inane pranks to physical abuse. However, my search was limited due to the post being locked by an admin who saw how crazy things were becoming. He locked it just before a Discord chat room was made, an app which I did have an account for, so I continued my search there. I joined, and my immediate reaction was disgust. It was a room wholly dedicated about me, and not in a good way. There weren't many people in there compared to the people joining in on the forum post, but the people in the post were all talk. This select few were about action. I dug through the chat room where they had piled up more information gathered by scoping me out. Times of when I left the house, when I went to the gym, where I went for lunch. It was added in a separate room just for information. In the events tab were a lot of things described which I had been noticing. Details about, quote, marking my house, which involved urinating on my door, which explained the wet marks I kept finding there. It seemed that was the initiation that they used to get a new member involved. There were schedules posted for a different person every so often to stalk my house and cause eerie disturbances, howling at night, standing in front of the camera, which they somehow immediately knew was there. The scratches were agreed upon and executed, purposely etched in to look like claw marks. However, along with this were dozens of other malicious ideas, either marked as denied or put off for the future. They were smart too. They never put any of their own information in there. They hid under the guise of anonymity, meaning if I did get the police involved now, the best they could do was shut down the room and keep a lookout for a few weeks, something which I felt would only delay their goals, not stop them. I changed my name just in case and decided to infiltrate the group, acting as a new member. I joined in as a timid observer, suggesting ideas and voting on ideas which to me were the lesser of evils. Should they break my windows or tag my house? I chose tag, since I could power wash that away. Should they throw used diapers at my windows or leave a dump on my doorstep? I voted diapers, since they were easier to clean. As things were escalating, they all agreed on one thing. They were going to have a meeting. They announced that this is where they would discuss more illicit plans, which they agreed was a good idea to keep off the internet. This made me panic. If what they were discussing in the Discord was what they deemed okay to talk about, what was so bad they had to only talk about it in person? I had to find out. I also had another motive too. While there, I could possibly get some information on them in person. Something to pin them to the crimes and finally get the law involved. I obviously couldn't just show up out of the blue, so I needed a way to sneak in. And the idea came to me in an instant. I would infiltrate, hidden, in a fursuit. I looked online through various local sources, and goddamn, those suits are expensive. I dug into my savings and bought what I judged was the cleanest looking one, a feature which added to the value. And even then, it still had hints of smells which I would better like to not think about. On the day of the meeting, I showed up perfectly on time and insidiously sat, a sheep in wolf's clothing, hiding amongst the other wolves out for blood. The meeting started with a speech. Talks of justice, talks of community, talks of sending a message. After these general corralling words, they then mentioned about the victim, me. At this, I became alert. I was ready to mentally note down every detail I could use to protect myself. However, what he followed up with made me freeze in fear. He's in the room with us right now. The talker didn't even point me out at this. yet they all turned and looked directly at me. How did they know? I was especially careful in every step of my infiltration, and worst of all was the ideas racing through my head of what they were going to do to me. I was in an isolated room in the middle of nowhere, the only witnesses being the people who despised me. There was no point in hiding anymore, so I pulled off my mask, so at least if these were my last moments, I'd be breathing good air rather than the stuffy atmosphere which built up in that suit. After gasping in some nice, refreshing cool air, I voiced my impressed confusion. I asked how they knew it was me. Their answer made me realize how careless I was. They explained that above the information they gathered about my address and name, they also found my online footprints, my commonly used usernames and such, so they pinned which account was me from the audit logs on Discord. Also, they're the main people in the local furry community, so when I came up with a brilliant idea to hide in a suit, they knew which outfit was me due to the order being sent to my address in my name. As soon as I heard how out of my element I was, I panicked. I rambled the first things that came to my head. I hastily started profusely apologizing. I tried to offer the world in my grovel. I said I'd pay for any damages. I would get on my knees and beg that I would even give them the suit I just bought, free of charge. After my tirade, there was silence. Then the leader took off his mask, revealing who it was. This was either a good thing or the worst thing to happen. On one hand, it showed whatever happens that he trusts me. Or, on the other hand, that I won't be in any condition to be able to describe him to any authorities. He walked up to me, slowly, which gave off a menacing vibe. He then started talking. He said he'll take it, that he felt that I'd been through enough, and that I learnt my lesson. He then leaned in to my personal space, way too close for comfort. I could feel my heartbeat rise in anticipation, reverberating in the hollow suit I was in. In a low, more frightening tone, he threatened that if I ever messed with them again in any way, what happens to me would be much worse. At this, he leaned in a little closer and ran his tongue up the side of my cheek. Without context, it probably looked like the way a dog gives a kiss. But to me, it felt like him leaving his signature, that what he said was a contract, and he just signed the deal. I stripped out of the outfit, leaving it with them, and shamelessly made my way home in my underwear, looking much like a person caught walking home from a one-night stand gone wrong. From then on, I did as I was told. I haven't bothered anyone in that community. On the off chance I see a furry, I stay clear of them by a wide margin. And since then, I haven't been heckled since. Sometimes I'll see one of them out of costume, the only indicator being a fluffy keychain tail hanging off the back of their jeans or some other animal-inspired accessory. If I accidentally make eye contact, I nod in a silent agreement, and they nod back, both of us acknowledging the agreement with a manner of respect.